I didn't know a family could collapse without shouting. There was no slammed door, no fist through a wall, no moment where someone screamed, "That's it, we're done." It started with my daughter asking me, in a voice too quiet for a 14-year-old, "Mom, do we really have to have family day this time?" At first, I thought she was just tired, overwhelmed. Being a teenager is hard enough without homework, hormones, and expectations stacked on top of you. But something in her eyes didn't match her words. She wouldn't look at me. Her shoulders were tight, like she was bracing for something invisible. 6 weeks later, I would understand why. My brother had been making comments about her body, about her growing up, about becoming a woman. And when I did the one thing I thought any mother should do, when I protected my child and drew a line, my own parents told me my daughter was lying. They said she wanted attention. They said she had a crush on her uncle. They said I was overreacting. They said I was destroying the family. I was 42 years old, married for 16 years, with 2 children I would burn the world down for if I had to. I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew where everyone stood when things got hard. I was wrong. Because when a teenage girl finally found the courage to say, "This makes me uncomfortable," the adults in the room didn't ask how to protect her. They asked how to protect him. And the worst part? For a while I was standing alone, until another girl, my brother's own daughter, spoke up. And suddenly, everything my parents had dismissed as misunderstanding started to look like a pattern they had been refusing to see for years. This is the story of how I lost the family I thought I had, how I chose my daughter when no one else would, and how telling the truth, even quietly, still managed to shatter everything. If you had asked me 2 months ago to describe my family, I would have used the word close without thinking. Not perfect, never perfect, but close in that familiar, predictable way. The kind of family where you know which chair your father will sit in before he even arrives. The kind where your mother will comment on the dust on the baseboards and still kiss your cheek like she owns the right to both criticize and comfort you. I'm 42, and I've been married to Joyce for 16 years. We met when we were both young enough to believe love could solve everything. Joyce has always been steadier than me, warm but not naive, careful in the way that comes from having learned early that adults don't always protect you the way they should. We have 2 kids, Ruth, 14, and Zachary, 10. Ruth has always been the one who fills a room without trying. She's bright, quick, energetic, one of those kids who organizes games at family gatherings like she's running a small summer camp, and somehow everyone listens. Zachary is softer, more observant, the kind of boy who notices when people are tense, even if he can't name why. My parents live about 20 minutes away, close enough that dropping by has always been a possibility, sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating. My mother has opinions about everything: how you cook, how you fold towels, how you raise children, how you keep a home. My father is the calmer one. He plays mediator, the man who believes every problem can be solved if everyone just speaks softly enough. I have 2 siblings. My older brother, Doug, is 45. He's been divorced for 3 years and has a daughter named Andrea who's 16. My younger sister, Evelyn, is 39, married to a man named Tom, and they have twin boys who are 7. For the last 8 years, we've had a tradition. Every other month, we do what we call Family Day. It rotates between houses. Barbecue, board games, kids running wild in the backyard, adults pretending they aren't aging by clinging to traditions like they're proof we still belong to each other. Everyone has a role. My parents love it because they get all their grandchildren in one place. Evelyn loves it because she likes the structure of it. She's the type who brings labeled containers and coordinated snacks for the twins. Doug loves it because he loves being the fun one. The uncle who shows up with a guitar, a joke, a story, and the kind of confidence that makes people mistake charm for goodness. And Ruth? Ruth has always been the son of those gatherings. She's the kid who helps me set up chairs without being asked, then runs off to build a game for the younger ones. For a long time, she was especially close to Doug. 2 years ago, he taught her how to play guitar. After that, they bonded over music in a way I thought was sweet, harmless, even helpful. I remember watching them on the porch, Doug guiding her fingers on the strings, Ruth concentrating like her whole future depended on hitting the right note. I was proud of that. I was grateful, even. Because when you're a parent, you want your children surrounded by adults who love them. You want your kids to have people beyond you, safe people who make the world feel bigger and kinder. So when it was our turn to host Family Day about 6 weeks ago, I did what I always do. Joyce and I planned it 3 weeks in advance. We made lists: food, drinks, games. We cleaned the house like we were preparing for inspection because my mother's standards have always hovered over us like a silent scoreboard. It was supposed to be normal. Just another Sunday full of laughter, smoke from the grill, and children's footsteps pounding across the floor. I didn't know that my daughter had already started trying to save herself. Quietly, carefully, in the only way a 14-year-old knows how. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come as a confession. It came as a request. 2 weeks before Family Day, Ruth stood in the doorway of the kitchen while I was washing dishes. She hovered there longer than usual, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, like she was trying to find the right moment to speak. "Mom," she said. "Yeah?" I replied, not turning around yet. "Do we have to do Family Day this time?" I glanced over my shoulder, surprised. Ruth had never asked that before. Family Day was her thing. She loved it. The noise, the chaos, the feeling of being surrounded. "Why?" I asked gently. She shrugged too quickly. I have a lot of homework." It didn't sit right. Ruth is a good student, but she's always managed her time well. School had never stopped her from anything she cared about. Still, I told myself I was reading too much into it. Teenagers change. They get tired. They get moody. A week later, she asked again. This time, she didn't even pretend to be casual. "Can we just cancel it?" she said, standing in the hallway outside my bedroom. "Maybe we could just go out to dinner. Just us." Her voice cracked on the last word. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, folding laundry, feeling something tighten in my chest. "Cancel it entirely?" I asked. "Ruth, everyone's already planning to come." She nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "I know. I just thought maybe—" "We can't," I said, softer than my words deserved. "It wouldn't be fair to everyone." She went quiet after that. Not angry, not dramatic, just gone. She retreated to her room and stayed there for the rest of the evening. No music, no guitar, no laughter drifting down the hallway. Joyce noticed it too. That night, after the kids were in bed, she asked, "Have you noticed Ruth's been off lately?" I nodded. "She asked to cancel Family Day." Joyce frowned. "That's not like her." "No," I agreed, "it's not." But we still didn't know what we were looking at. We didn't have a shape for the problem yet, just a shadow. 3 days before Family Day, everything changed. Joyce came into the garage while I was organizing supplies for the barbecue. Her face was pale, her jaw tight in a way that made my stomach drop before she even spoke. "Ruth's been crying in her room," she said quietly. I finally got her to tell me what's wrong. I put the box down slowly. "What?" Joyce crossed her arms like she was holding herself together. "She says Doug makes her uncomfortable." The words didn't land all at once. They floated, disconnected, like they didn't belong to our reality. "What do you mean, uncomfortable?" I asked. Joyce swallowed. She didn't want to tell me at first. She kept saying she was probably overreacting, but she said he's been saying things to her. Comments. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't wait for Joyce to finish. I went upstairs and knocked on Ruth's door. When I stepped inside, she was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped around them like she was trying to make herself smaller. "Hey," I said, sitting beside her. "Mom told me you've been having a hard time." She nodded, eyes filling immediately with tears. It took her 10 minutes to speak. 10 minutes of quiet sobbing, of me rubbing her back and telling her she didn't have to rush. And when she finally did start talking, every word felt like a thread being pulled loose from something I thought was solid. She told me about comments Doug had been making at the last 2 Family Days, how he said she was growing up to be really pretty, how he joked that boys at her school must be lining up for her, how he told her she was developing nicely and that he could see she was becoming a woman. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Then it kept happening, and it got worse. Ruth stared at the blanket beneath her fingers as she spoke, tracing the same small pattern over and over like it was the only thing anchoring her to the room. "He didn't just say it once," she whispered. "It kept happening." I stayed silent, afraid that if I interrupted her, the words might stop coming. She told me that during the last Family Day, Doug had cornered her in the kitchen when everyone else was outside. She said she'd been getting herself a drink, thinking she was safe because it was still loud and people were close. "He asked if I had a boyfriend," she said, her voice shaking. "What did you say?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. I said no. Then he asked if I'd kissed anyone yet. My hands curled into fists on the bed. She told me she tried to leave, but for a second, just a second, he stepped into her path. Not enough to make a scene. Just enough to remind her that he was bigger, older, and in control of the space. He told me it would be our little secret, she said, and then he moved so I could leave. Something inside my chest constricted so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. She went on, words tumbling faster now. Like once the dam broke, everything behind it had to come out. She told me the hugs had changed. Doug used to give her quick side hugs, the kind you barely notice. But in the past few months, he'd started hugging her from the front, holding on longer, his hands resting on her waist. The last time, she said, her voice barely audible, his hand slid down to my hip and stayed there. He was talking to Grandpa like nothing was wrong. She tried to pull away, she told me. She didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want people to ask questions. But he held on tighter, she said. I felt like the room was tilting. When she finally stopped talking, the silence was deafening. Joyce was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed tight across her chest, tears running down her face. I realized then that she'd been listening the whole time. I forced myself to stay calm. I needed Ruth to see that I was steady, that I could handle this. Did he ever touch you anywhere else? I asked carefully. No, she said quickly. He never... not like that. Did he ever try to get you alone somewhere private? She shook her head. No, but I started making sure I wasn't in the same room with him unless other people were around. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I took her hands in mine. You don't ever have to see him again, I said. Do you understand that? Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, I said without hesitation. I promise. Her shoulders sagged, like she'd been holding herself upright by sheer force and finally didn't have to anymore. Then she started crying harder. Not from fear, but from relief. But family day, she sobbed. I don't want to ruin it for everyone. I pulled her into my arms. You're not ruining anything. Nothing is more important than keeping you safe. That night, after the kids were asleep, Joyce and I sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet. She told me something she'd never shared before, about an uncle who'd acted the same way when she was around Ruth's age. How nothing physical ever happened, but the looks, the comments, the way he'd linger too long had made her feel unsafe in her own family. My parents didn't take it seriously, she said. They said he didn't mean anything by it. Her voice hardened. I won't let that happen to our daughter. The next morning, I called my parents. I told them we needed to cancel family day. My mother immediately asked why. When I tried to deflect, she pressed harder, so I told her, briefly, that Ruth wasn't comfortable around Doug and that we needed to address it as a family before any more gatherings happened. There was a long pause. Then my mother said, What exactly did Doug supposedly do? I told her, not every detail, but enough. Her response was instant and dismissive. She said Ruth was probably misunderstanding Doug's intentions, that he was just being a supportive uncle, that teenage girls sometimes get confused about attention from older men. I felt my hands shaking as I held the phone. I'm not accusing Doug of anything illegal, I said, but Ruth's discomfort is enough. My mother scoffed. You're making a serious accusation based on a child's interpretation. She's 14, I said. She knows when something feels wrong. My father took the phone then, trying to smooth things over. He suggested that we still have family day, and Ruth could just stay in another room when Doug was around. That was the moment I realized they didn't understand at all. No, I said, that's not a solution. The call ended badly. My mother said I was tearing the family apart over nothing. My father said we should talk calmly and not rush into decisions. I hung up knowing one thing with absolute clarity. This was no longer just about my brother. It was about who was willing to protect my daughter and who wasn't. The days after Ruth told us the truth felt unreal, like we were moving through a version of our lives that no longer followed the rules. Ruth kept asking if she'd done something wrong. Every time she asked, it cut deeper than the last. Did I cause a problem? She said one morning while picking at her breakfast. No, I answered immediately. The adults are handling it. But everyone's upset, she whispered. Because they don't know how to behave, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Not because of you. Still, the doubt had already taken root in her. That's what happens when kids speak up and the world doesn't immediately protect them. They start to wonder if silence would have been easier. Joyce and I barely slept. We replayed everything in our heads, every family gathering, every moment we'd trusted without question. I kept asking myself how I'd missed it, how I'd watched my brother hug my daughter and never thought to look closer. That guilt was a heavy, suffocating thing. The morning after the call with my parents, I texted Evelyn. I told her what Ruth had said. I told her we were canceling family day. I told her Doug wasn't welcome in our home anymore. She didn't respond right away. An hour later, she called. I don't know what to think, she said carefully. Tom thinks you're overreacting. The words landed like a slap. Overreacting, I repeated. He says Doug's always been good with the kids, she said, and that maybe Ruth is just uncomfortable with male attention right now. I closed my eyes. She's uncomfortable with her uncle making comments about her body. I know, Evelyn said quickly. I'm not saying Ruth's lying. I don't want to pick sides. There it was. Neutrality disguised as reason. I hung up feeling more alone than I had the day before. Then I texted Doug. I kept it direct, no accusations, no insults, just facts. I told him Ruth had expressed discomfort with his comments and physical contact, and that until he could understand why that was inappropriate, he was not welcome around our family. He called me within 5 minutes. He was furious. She's lying, he snapped. I've never done anything wrong. I told him to lower his voice. That girl has been acting inappropriately toward me, he said, following me around, trying to get my attention. I figured she had a crush and didn't know how to handle it. The words made my stomach turn. You think my 14-year-old daughter was coming on to you? I said. You don't see how she acts when you're not around, he replied. The way she dresses, the questions she asks. I told him he was out of his mind. He said I was naive. I hung up. He called back 3 times. I didn't answer. Then he sent a long text. He said I was going to regret alienating him over lies. He said Ruth was manipulating us. He said maybe I should take a hard look at how I'd raised a daughter who knew how to fabricate stories about family members. Joyce read the text over my shoulder. Her hands started shaking. That's exactly what predators do, she said quietly. They flip it. They blame the child. That night, my parents called again. This time, my mother was calm in a way that made me uneasy. She said she'd spoken to Doug. She said he was devastated. She said he admitted he might have been too casual with affection, but that it came from love. She said Doug was willing to apologize to Ruth if that would fix things. An apology that required us to accept his version of events. I told her that Doug's claim, that Ruth had been pursuing him, made his apology meaningless. My mother bristled. She said he was hurt and grasping for explanations. She said we were destroying his reputation over awkward but innocent behavior. My father took the phone and said they wanted to come over the next day to talk it out, with everyone present, including Ruth. No, I said, she is not being interrogated. My father said I was being unreasonable. I said families protect children instead of prioritizing the comfort of adults who refuse to respect boundaries. The call ended with my father saying he was disappointed in how I was handling this. I stared at the phone long after the screen went dark. I wasn't disappointed. I was furious. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about stopping one man from crossing a line. It was about whether I was willing to stand alone if that's what it took to keep my daughter safe. Once the truth was spoken out loud, everything accelerated. There was no going back to polite silence or pretending this was just a misunderstanding that would smooth itself over with time. The family I thought I knew began to fracture along fault lines that had always been there, just hidden beneath tradition and denial. The next few days were a blur of tension. Ruth asked again if she'd caused the family to fight. Zachary sensed something was wrong but didn't have the words for it. He just knew there wouldn't be a family day this time, and that Grandma and Grandpa weren't coming over. Evelyn called again. She said she was staying neutral. She said she loved Ruth and believed Ruth felt uncomfortable, but she couldn't imagine Doug doing anything predatory. She said she would continue seeing both sides separately and hope time would fix things. Time doesn't fix things like this. It just tells you who's willing to look away. My parents sent a group text to me, Doug and Evelyn asking for a family meeting. No kids present. Doug responded immediately, saying he'd be there. Evelyn agreed. I hesitated. Joyce told me not to go. It'll be 3 against 1, she said, and none of them are going to listen. I went anyway. I needed them to hear me say it to their faces. The meeting was at my parents' house. When I arrived, Doug was already there, sitting on the couch like he owned the room. My parents flanked him, my mother clutching a mug she hadn't touched, my father leaning forward like a mediator, preparing for battle. My mother started by saying she wanted us all to hear each other out and find a path forward before this caused permanent damage to the family. Doug spoke first. He said he wanted to apologize if his behavior had been misinterpreted. He said he loved Ruth like a daughter. He said his comments were men's compliments, and the hugs were normal family affection. Then he shifted. He said the real issue was that Ruth had become unusually attached to him over the past year. He said she'd sought him out constantly, texted him frequently, asked personal questions. He said she'd once asked if he'd ever date someone younger when she was older. I felt sick listening to him say it out loud. He claimed he'd been trying to gently discourage her without embarrassing her, that he'd never told Joyce or me because he didn't want to create a problem. He said Ruth's accusations were a way of dealing with rejection. My mother nodded along. She's at a complicated age, she said. Emotions get mixed up. I asked Doug if he seriously expected me to believe my 14-year-old daughter had romantic feelings for her uncle and fabricated accusations when he rejected her. He said he didn't want to believe it either, but it was the only explanation that made sense. I stood up. I told him his story was insulting. I told my parents that entertaining it meant calling Ruth a liar. I told Evelyn that there were no both sides when it came to a child's safety, and that fence-sitting was cowardice. My father said I was being emotional. I said I'd never been more clear-headed. I left. When I got home and told Joyce everything, she didn't hesitate. We need to pull back from your family, she said. Completely. Ruth can't be around people who question her truth. 2 days later, my mother called to tell me Doug had decided not to attend family events until this blew over. She called it a sacrifice. I called it the bare minimum. Then something shifted. Evelyn came over one afternoon without Tom. She sat at our kitchen table and told me she'd been thinking. She told me about a moment from years ago, when her twins were little and Doug had volunteered to give them baths. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. Tom had mentioned it was odd. She'd brushed it off. Now she couldn't stop thinking about it. She told me Doug's explanation didn't make sense, that if he truly thought Ruth had a crush on him, the appropriate response would have been to tell us, not handle it himself. She said she'd told Doug she needed space. He accused her of betraying him. 3 weeks passed without a word from my parents. Then Evelyn called late one night crying. She'd been looking through old photos from a family beach vacation 5 years ago. In one photo, Ruth was 9, standing by the pool. Doug's hand was on her lower back. Too low, too lingering. Evelyn had taken the photo herself. She said she'd dismissed it then. She couldn't dismiss it now. She found more. One of Doug teaching Ruth guitar, pressed close behind her. Another with his arm around her shoulders, his fingers touching the top of her chest. When Joyce and I saw the photos, we both had to sit down. The pattern was undeniable. Doug wasn't like that with any of the other kids. Evelyn confronted him. He denied everything. My mother accused Evelyn of betraying her son. That was when I told my parents the truth they didn't want to hear. If they continued defending Doug, they wouldn't be seeing my children anymore. My mother cried. My father threatened court. I told him to try, because at that point, the family I was fighting for wasn't the one that raised me. It was the one sleeping down the hall. There is a particular kind of silence that settles in after everything explodes. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of absence. No more calls from my parents. No more group texts buzzing with forced cheer. No more assumptions that family would always be there, no matter what. The house felt heavier without them, even though the tension was gone. Ruth tried to be normal. That scared me the most. She smiled when she thought she was supposed to. She did her homework. She helped Zachary with his Lego sets. But she stopped playing guitar. The instrument sat untouched in the corner of her room like a reminder of something she'd lost, not because of her own actions, but because someone had taken something sacred and twisted it. One night I found her sitting on her bed, staring at nothing. "Do you hate me?" she asked suddenly. The question hit me so hard I had to sit down. "Why would you ask that?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because Grandma and Grandpa don't come over anymore," she whispered, "and Uncle Doug doesn't either, and Aunt Evelyn looks sad all the time." My chest tightened. "This isn't because of you," I said. "It's because adults made choices." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe it. "That's the cruelest part. Children internalize consequences they never caused," Zachary asked, when we'd see Grandma and Grandpa again. I told him we were taking a break from big family gatherings. He accepted it the way children do, but sometimes I caught him staring at the door on weekends like he expected someone to show up anyway. I questioned myself in the quiet moments, not because I doubted Ruth, but because standing alone is exhausting. I wondered if I could have handled it differently, if there was a way to protect my daughter without losing my parents, if firmness could have come without finality. Then my phone rang. It was Evelyn. Her voice was shaking. "Doug's ex-wife called me," she said. My heart dropped. Melissa had primary custody of Andrea. She'd called because Andrea had finally told her something that happened a year ago. Doug had walked in on her changing. Andrea had screamed at him to get out. He stood there for a few seconds before leaving. Weeks later, he did it again. This time, Andrea locked the door after. She'd been embarrassed. She'd thought she was overreacting. Until she heard what our mother was saying about Ruth. Until she realized this wasn't just her. When Melissa told me, I felt like I was sinking through the floor. That night, I sat with Ruth and told her what Andrea had said. Ruth broke down. She sobbed into my shoulder and said, "I was so scared I was the only one." I held her and told her the truth. "You were brave," I said. "You did everything right." Joyce suggested we document everything: photos, messages, timelines. She suggested we talk to a lawyer. The lawyer told us the truth we already knew. Without physical contact or explicit evidence, there might not be charges. But there would be a record, a pattern. 2 weeks later, my parents showed up unannounced. My father demanded to see the kids. My mother said Doug had done nothing wrong. Ruth came downstairs when she heard raised voices. She stood there shaking. "I don't want to see you if you still support him," she said to my parents. My mother said believing Ruth felt uncomfortable didn't mean Doug had done anything wrong. Ruth said, "That's the same as calling me a liar." She went upstairs. My parents left. That night, I sat alone in the dark after everyone went to bed. I grieved my parents. I grieved the family I thought I had. But I didn't grieve my choice. Because if protecting my daughter meant standing in the rubble of what used to be, then that was a price I would pay every time. The call came late at night, the kind that makes your heart race before you even answer. It was Evelyn. She didn't waste time. "Something changed," she said, "everything." She told me she'd been going through Andrea's old phone with Melissa, helping her gather things for the restraining order. Text messages Doug had sent late at night. Questions that had seemed harmless once, now unmistakably wrong. "What are you wearing? Still awake?" "Just checking on you." The counselor said it wasn't normal. It wasn't parental. It wasn't innocent. It was a pattern. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. Melissa was turning everything over to her lawyer. Andrea didn't want to see Doug anymore. A judge had granted the restraining order. Doug's narrative collapsed quietly. No dramatic arrest, no courtroom spectacle. Just consequences stacking up until there was nowhere left to hide. My mother called me that same day. She was frantic. She said Doug was depressed, that he barely left his house, that he'd lost weight, that we'd destroyed his life. I told her his life wasn't destroyed by lies. It was exposed by truth. My father took the phone and threatened court. Grandparents' rights. He said I was manipulative, cruel, vindictive. The lawyer laughed softly when I told him. "They defended the person accused of inappropriate behavior," he said. "That works in your favor." That night, Doug emailed me. He said I'd ruined everything, that Andrea wouldn't speak to him, that Melissa had poisoned her against him, that Ruth had manipulated us all, that one day the truth would come out. I didn't respond. I didn't need to anymore. The power had shifted. Ruth started playing guitar again. Not at first in front of anyone, just softly, in her room. I'd hear the hesitant pluck of strings through the wall late at night, like she was reclaiming something piece by piece. Evelyn came over every week. She apologized for hesitating, for doubting, for not standing up sooner. I forgave her, not because it didn't hurt, but because she chose truth when it finally demanded a side. My parents sent birthday cards for the kids. We didn't respond. Doug moved to another town an hour away. Through Evelyn, I heard he'd been telling people we'd made everything up to destroy him. It didn't matter, because the people who mattered knew, and the people who didn't weren't entitled to my children. One evening, Ruth sat beside me on the couch and said something that told me we'd crossed the threshold. "I'm not scared anymore," she said. I was, but now I know I did the right thing. I squeezed her hand. So did I. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in ripples, small, steady, unavoidable. Doug didn't lose everything overnight. That would have been too clean, too cinematic. Instead, he lost things the way people often do when the truth catches up to them. One relationship at a time, one door quietly closing after another. Melissa finalized the restraining order. Andrea refused to see him. She blocked his number, changed her routines, and started counseling. Through Evelyn, I heard that Doug told anyone who would listen that he was being punished for nothing, that his own family had turned on him based on lies told by emotional teenage girls. The phrase made my stomach turn every time I heard it. My parents became smaller in my world. They called less, then not at all. When they did reach out, it wasn't to ask about Ruth or Zachary. It was to tell me how hurt they were, how embarrassed, how betrayed. Never how my daughter was doing. That told me everything I needed to know. They talked about family unity, like it was a fragile object Ruth had dropped and shattered, instead of something Doug had cracked long before anyone wanted to look at it. My father followed through on his threat, briefly. He consulted a lawyer about grandparents' rights. When he learned how their defense of Doug would be scrutinized, the idea quietly disappeared. No apology followed. Just silence. Evelyn stood her ground. She told our parents that until they acknowledged the harm Doug caused, they wouldn't be around her kids either. That decision cost her dearly. My mother accused her of abandoning the family, of choosing lies over blood. Evelyn cried in my kitchen when she told me, but she didn't waver. Joyce and I settled into a new rhythm, one without extended family gatherings, without forced smiles, without the constant undercurrent of tension that I now realized had always been there. Zachary adapted faster than I expected. Kids do that when the home they live in feels safe. He stopped asking about Grandma and Grandpa. He started inviting friends over instead. Ruth changed in quieter ways. She stopped shrinking herself. She spoke more directly, set clearer boundaries with friends. If something made her uncomfortable, she named it. Watching that was painful and beautiful at the same time. One afternoon, she said, "I don't feel bad anymore." I asked her what she meant. "For ruining things," she said. "I didn't ruin anything. He did." I hugged her and cried into her hair when she wasn't looking. Doug's absence became permanent. He moved farther away, changed jobs, rewrote the story of his life to anyone who would listen. But even lies get tired when they have to work that hard to survive. The truth, on the other hand, just exists. Quietly, firmly. My parents send cards on birthdays and holidays. We don't respond, not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because access to my children is a privilege, not a right, and protecting them isn't negotiable. The family I thought I had doesn't exist anymore. But the family I do have is intact, stronger, honest, and built on the understanding that safety matters more than tradition. I used to believe that protecting my children meant keeping their world intact, keeping traditions alive, keeping relationships whole, keeping peace, even when it felt uncomfortable. I know better now. Protecting my children meant letting some things break. It meant choosing truth over comfort, safety over appearance, my daughter's voice over the silence that had kept adults comfortable for generations. Ruth still plays guitar. Not the same songs she used to. Those belong to a different version of her, but new ones she's teaching herself now. Sometimes I catch her sitting on the edge of her bed, eyes closed, fingers confident on the strings. There's something steady in her now, something grounded. Zachary is growing, blissfully unaware of the full weight of what happened. And I'm grateful for that. Children shouldn't have to carry the burden of adult failures. Joyce and I are closer than we've ever been. We learned what it looks like to be united when it matters most, to listen, to believe, and to act without hesitation. I don't regret losing my parents' approval. I don't regret cutting off my brother. I regret only that my daughter had to be brave in the first place. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's this. Discomfort is not confusion. Boundaries are not cruelty. And believing a child should never be treated as an act of betrayal. Families don't fall apart because someone tells the truth. They fall apart because too many people refuse to hear it. I didn't choose to lose my family. I chose to protect my daughter. And I would make that choice again, every single time.